Hey, what?
I feel sad. This is our last night.
Yeah, well,
Next
this
week.
isn't this. No, this is the
Oh,
last
this is the
one.
last one?
This is the last class.
Oh, I thought it was next week.
Everyone, welcome to Decoding the Talmud.
Last class.
Last class, the grand finale. And it's worth it. It's worth it. We've made it to the grand finale. But those saying, oh, we feel bad. Don't worry. There's another JLI court. First of all, there's a lady for the ladies, April 1st. There's the Rosh Chodesh Society. That's on Monday? Tuesday at 6 p.m. So for the ladies, that's over here. And then on Thursday, April 3rd, is the Shloshim, 7 p.m. Whoever wants to participate, that will be here as well. And then now's a great time than ever to already let you know about the next course. So you have a bookmark that came along with your course, but we have a little video here as well. Okay, so 4 Wednesdays of I can't believe that actually happened, beginning May 7th. 12 incredible stories, truly fascinating, but grouped by theme. So every lesson, it's more, if you like to be entertained, then this is the course for you. This class, I feel like the Decoding the Talmud, you had to put in a little work with your brain. Next course is the polar opposite. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy. So that's 4 Wednesdays beginning May 7th. And you can register at jewishtlb.org/JLI. Okay. For today's topic, the Talmud until today. So just like a preview of just some history is we explore the history from Moses and Mount Sinai. We fast forward, we went through the Jews get into the land of Israel, destruction of the first temple, exile into Babylon, rebuilding the second temple, destruction of the second temple. Jews are trying to remember the oral tradition, but it's too overwhelming. So they make a code. And that code takes us to the year 200, but we're talking about not in the Jewish calendar. We're talking about in modern convention, how people count today. So we're in the year 2025. So in the year 200 was when the Mishnah was composed. The Mishnah is the code to help remember the oral tradition. Okay. Finally, for the next 300 years after that, we have the composition of the Talmud. But what happened in the last 1500 years? Where has the Talmud taken us today? In the last 1500 years, since the Talmud was redacted, what has been going on in the world of the Talmud? How has it developed? Once the Talmud was closed, was it a book put on the shelf? Okay, we have a Talmud. I never looked at it again. What happened since? And the truth is, the more things change, the more things stay the same. You know, so there was these 3 Jewish men, Sam, Abe, and Morris, and they're thinking, where should we go out for lunch? And they decide, in their 40s, they decide they're going to go to the kosher deli uptown because it has the best looking waitresses. But then they meet again when they turn 50, and they're thinking, where should we go out for dinner? Where should we go out for lunch? And they decide, we're going to go to the kosher deli uptown because they have the best pastrami sandwiches. 10 years later, they meet up again, and they're thinking, where should we go for lunch? And they decide they're going to go to the kosher deli uptown because it has the best parking. They meet again at 70, and they're thinking, where should we meet for lunch? And they decide, we'll go to the kosher deli uptown because they have the best wheelchair accessible bathrooms. And 10 years later, at 80, they meet again, and they decide, where are they going to meet for lunch? At the kosher deli uptown, because they've never been there before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the more things change, the more things change, the more things stay the same.
That was good.
And that's kind of the way it works with the Talmud. That always this tension of trying to make things accessible.
Right, how are you doing?
Always the tension of trying to make
Hold
things
on.
accessible is one pull. We want to make things accessible. And to make things accessible, you kind of have to dumb things down, minimize, cut out, scrap. You're trying to make it easy to understand. But then, as time goes on, that thing that was very accessible now needs to be explained. And people discuss it. And so you constantly have this shortening or compression of the oral tradition. Then it gets unpacked. Then it gets recompressed to make it easy. Then it gets unpacked and compressed and unpacked. And that's what's been going on in the last 1,500 years. And so we're going to go on the journey together. Okay. So the first thing is something important to understand about the Talmud. There's two halves to this class. The first half is understanding Talmud as a book of law, right? At the end of the day, you wanted to know how to live as a Jew. You couldn't just look in the 5 books of Moses. You also have to look in the Talmud to know how to behave. Okay, so people looked at the Talmud as a book of law, but people also studied the Talmud for Talmud's sake, just to understand the Talmud and to engage in the discussions and the debates and the legends. And so there's a whole part of Talmud, even if you're not trying to learn the law, there's a very deep love that Jews have of learning the Talmud. So in the second half, we're going to explore the history of learning the Talmud for Talmud's sake, which has its own history. But in the first half, we're going to explore exploring the Talmud to try to know how to be a Jew, how to live as a Jew. You want to know how to do it? So we're going to learn the history. So the first step is understanding that there was always this drive to create consensus in practice in the Jewish community. And when the Babylonian Talmud was finished in 500 CE, so about 1,500 years ago, there was a binding book of Jewish law that applied to all Jews everywhere. Why? Because all the major rabbis of the Jewish people lived where? All together. They were all in Babylon. They all agreed to be bound by the conclusions of the Talmud. Now, does that mean, and remember, does that mean that the Talmud doesn't have, when they followed a certain ruling, does that mean they don't have respect for rulings that were rejected or proposals that were? No, we still have respect, but it's not the conclusion. So imagine you have a bunch of children that are getting together to plan a gift for their mother's birthday, right? They have limited resources. And one child puts on the table, we should get roses. And the other child puts on the table, we should send her to a spa. And the third child says, we should get together and make her a birthday party, right? All 3 points are valuable. And if you had infinite resources, you do all 3. But you don't have, so you have to go one way. And that one way that will be binding on all the children. The children take a vote, and then everyone has to chip in. You can't have that this child says, no, I'm only doing the roses, but I only have $5 to spend. And the next child says, I'm doing a birthday party, but I only have $5 to spend. And the third one, it's better if you pool your money together and go with one way. And so that's the ideal. There's a beauty in that. However, there's also a separate beauty with each child writing their own separate text message to the mother, or their own letter, or their own call, right? And so you give a gift together, but then there's also something unique about the way the oldest child calls and the middle child calls. And so while there's this one push in one direction that everyone should be on the same page, there's also another pull at the other direction that we don't have to lose our uniqueness either. We want to show up to Hashem in who we are. And so there's this tension in both directions of being all on the same page where it makes sense. Okay, so when the Babylonian Talmud was written in 500 CE, it became binding on the entire Jewish people. It doesn't matter if I have a different agreement. If I have a disagreement, I'm a rabbi that lives 500 years after the Talmud was written, and I say, I disagree with how the Talmud came to their conclusion of the oral tradition. I think it should be a different way. Doesn't matter. Because already you're competing with the consensus of all the rabbis that existed at that time. And they all bound themselves, we're following this way. We voted on it. This is the way the Jewish people are going to practice tradition. So let's read that in text 1. And this is from the introduction, Maimonides in his introduction, explaining the history of the oral tradition. Okay. This is on page 212 in the student book. Okay, if we can get a volunteer from the online crowd to read for us text 1. Go ahead, Stan. Yeah.
Okay, text 1. Ravina and Rav Ashi and their colleagues constituted the end of the era of the sages who authoritatively transmitted the oral Torah and who set in place ordinances, decrees, and customs that became accepted as normative practiced by all Jewish people. By contrast, any ordinance, decree, or custom instituted by any court that arose after the Talmud in any land, whether it was instituted for the inhabitants of that land or for an entire region, did not become accepted as normative by the entire Jewish people. Therefore, if one of the post-Talmudic scholars taught that, in a specific case, the judgment ought to be in a certain way, then a later court subsequently determined that the earlier ruling was an inaccurate interpretation of the Talmud. We did not follow the earlier conclusion. We follow whichever ruling is more logically correct and in greater accordance with the Talmud, whether its author lived in an earlier or later generation. All decisions recorded in the Babylonian Talmud, however, are obligatory upon the entire Jewish people.
Okay, so we have 2 rules here. Number 1, the conclusions of the Talmud are binding. And number 2, rulings issued after the Talmud's conclusion by one community's halachic authority are not binding on another Jewish community. So if you have a Chabad rabbi and you say, my Chabad rabbi told me this, but I heard a different rabbi said something different. Okay. Yeah, that's how it works. Everyone's trying to apply principles when they come in tension. You have 2 Jewish principles, 2 Jewish values. They come into tension in real life, right? You're trying to figure out which value supersedes. I have a mitzvah to love another Jew, but I also have a mitzvah to keep Shabbat. What happens when these 2 things come in tension? Which one should I prioritize? Yeah, well, you go to your rabbi and he's going to look into the Talmud, he's going to look into the sources, try to figure out how to apply that, right? Each rabbi is trying to be sincere to help you follow the Torah in the best way. But how to apply that could be different based on the rabbis. And it's also based on circumstance. So certainly the history of what the Jewish community was going through at the time had to play on how the rabbis understood how to apply the values. So that's why Sephardic rabbis, they kind of went in one tradition, and Ashkenazic rabbis went in a different tradition. Some is based on the spiritual teachings that they received in tradition, and some is based on the circumstances that they were going through. So over the next 500 years, there was still great yeshivas and academies in Babylon, but they didn't have the monopoly. They had the institutional knowledge. So when Jewish communities popped up in North Africa and in France and in Germany and in wherever in Italy, wherever new Jewish communities popped up and new great yeshivas popped up, there was their own rulings and own decrees and own traditions. However, very often for the first 500 years, there was a lot of crossover. where letters would be flying back and forth between the Babylonian yeshivas and the Ashkenaz yeshivas, because the Babylonian yeshivas, they had the institutional knowledge, but they weren't necessarily considered the authority to make rulings for all communities. So that takes us to, and actually in next course, one of the stories we're going to uncover is how that dispersion happened. How did you have these great rabbis end up in other places? A fascinating story of the four captives, really a crazy story, but that's for another time. Okay, so that's the first post-Talmudic literature. If you want to know Jewish law, you looked in the Talmud, but you also looked at the responsa. The responsa were these letters back and forth that were question, answer. So, and what's amazing, a discovery that they discovered a lot of these responsa intact about 100 years ago. Responsa that Jewish sages never knew about. Why? What's the magic of this? Is Egypt is kind of in the middle of between the Europe on one side and Babylon on the other side. So what happened is people would write a letter. It would travel by camelback or other way. It would stop over in Cairo in Egypt. The people there would write a copy of the question, send over the question on its way, and then when they would receive the answer, they would copy the answer and send the answer on to the community. And so these copies, so Cairo had an extensive, but what happened with, what do Jews do when they have things that they're not going to use? Do they just throw it out in the garbage? No, you have to treat it with respect. So traditionally what they would do is they would store it on the top of the synagogue, and then they would bury it at a certain time. Well, Cairo has the perfect temperature and climate, very dry and warm, to keep these documents preserved. And about 100 years ago, some people's like, oh, there's some documents with Hebrew writing on it. Anyone want to come see? And these massive collections of treasures. We're talking about treasures of Jewish wisdom has been discovered there. So that's just an amazing side fact that I don't know. I just so fascinated. You could Google the Cairo Geniza, fascinating history to there. Okay. Now we go on about the year 1000. We're now up to the year 1000. And there's a difficulty in studying Talmud and trying to know how to live. What's the difficulty in studying Talmud and trying to know how to live? It's very hard. You're reading it and there's a Mishnah says this and the Breita says this. One interpretation is like this and another interpretation is like this. Maybe we reject it. No, we keep it. Oh, okay. And you're like, so what's the answer? What was the answer? It's not easy, right? So there was a rabbi who said, that's it. We have the big Talmud. We're going to make a little Talmud. The little Talmud is going to try to cut out any information in the Talmud that's not final halachic ruling, cut out. So if it's a legend in the Talmud, not there. If it's an opinion that's rejected, not there. If it's a question and answer that's not part of the final solution, not there. Okay? So we'll take an exercise and we're going to look at a sample of one of these texts. So let's look. Let's first read the challenge inside of Maimonides text 3. Gilda, you want to read text 3 out loud? Text 3 on page 217.
Okay. The Talmud's manner of expression is extremely profound. Furthermore, it is composed in Aramaic with some other language thrown in as well. That vernacular was well understood by all the Jews of Babylonia during the era in which the Talmud was composed. In other locations, however, and even within Babylonia during the subsequent era of the
Gaonim.
No one could understand the language without being taught.
Okay, so now the Talmud is getting more difficult for people to study. We don't speak the language. So let's go to text 4a. Text 4a, page 220. Page 220, we're going to have a sample of the version of the Talmud as it's found in the Little Talmud. And which text are we going to choose? We're going to choose a text that we've been studying throughout this lesson, and it's not about shy green lions. It's about the eve of Passover, okay? So I'm going to read it out loud. Text 4a, or let's get a volunteer, actually. Jillian, you want to read text 4a, page 220.
Mishnah, one must refrain from eating on the eve of Passover, from close to the time for reciting the Mincha prayers until after darkness has fallen. Gemara, we learn in a Breda. One should not eat on the eves of Shabbat or festivals from the time of Mincha and onward, so that one enters Shabbat or the festivals with an appetite. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yudea. Conversely, Rabbi Yosei says that one may continue eating until it grows dark. The law follows the view of Rabbi Yosei because there is a rule that the law favors Rabbi Yosei over his colleagues, and our Mishnah regarding Passover Eve concurs with all views because Rabbi Yosei will concede that eating is prohibited on the eve of Passover due to the obligation to eat matzah.
Okay, so we noticed there how he summarized the text and he went straight to the conclusion. What's the conclusion? There is no ban the rest of the year. On Passover, there is a special ban because it's a special obligation to eat matzah.
Question. Is there a minhag about not eating for a full month? Not that you shouldn't eat
Matzah.
for-
Yeah, there is a custom not to eat matzah for 30 days, but there's also a rabbinic decree at least the day before, 24 hours before Passover, not to eat matzah.
Because I was arguing with someone like, you do that for 30 days and now you're doing this, right?
We'll get into it. Oh, you're very good. Wow, you're really ahead. Okay, so that's the version of the short. Now, this is why the student book is so valuable, is you look at 4b, we're not going to read it, but 4b is basically the version of Talmud before it was cut out. The lines that cross out, we have the version with the cross out, and we have the light shading is the additions. So the one who wrote this shorter Talmud, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, and he mostly cut. That was his main job. He cut. And you could see all the things he crossed out. Everyone see how does it appear? Yeah. You see all the lines that are cut out? Yeah. So look how much shorter text 4a is compared to text 4b, right? And it's a little gray, the lighter font, that's his addition. Where, okay, what's the conclusion? Because we have a principle elsewhere in the Talmud that whenever there's a disagreement, we follow Rabbi Yossi. So then that's how we're going to rule here, you know? And so that's kind of simple. Makes the work much easier if you're trying to figure out how to live as a Jew, looking through the whole Talmud. It's a lot. It's Aramaic. Well, he didn't really solve that problem. The shorter Talmud is still in Aramaic, right? But he did solve, it goes straight to the conclusions. Okay? Now, let's go on. About 200 years later, that's one great rabbi. His name was Hilchot Harif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. The digest extracted only relevant halachic conclusions from the Talmud. Okay? And this was so exciting to people. It became very popular. Today, where can you find this? If you're interested in looking at this work, it's printed in the back of every Talmud. So every Talmud, if you're learning tractate of Shabbat, so in the beginning is the regular Talmud, and in the back, you'll find the Talmud Ktsara, the shortened version, or Hilchos Harif, different names for what the title is called, okay? But now, 200 years later, we get to a more amazing updated version of this concept called the Halachic Code. The Halachic Code says, hold on. you're a Jew that wants to know how to live. Even studying the shorter Talmud is still difficult. First of all, the short Talmud is still organized in the way the Talmud's organized, right? And the Talmud is not that the fact that, there's details about this discussion of Passover that you'll only find in a different tractate. So if you really want to know the laws of the eve before Passover, you have to study like 3 tractates. You have to know where to look, and it's in Aramaic, and it doesn't explain all the reasons. And it gives names, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is not relevant to us. So there was one man, his name was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, famously called Maimonides. And Maimonides says, that's it. I'm going to make a version of the oral tradition that I'm going to write out in simple Hebrew every single law that you need to know. If so, all you have to do is read the 5 books of Moses and read my 14-volume Mishnah Torah, and now you know the whole oral tradition. So in a way, his Mishnah Torah was trying to do what the Mishnah did like 800 years before. The Mishnah was trying to make it easy for the oral tradition to be preserved. He's trying that again 800 years later, but with taking all the Talmud concepts into consideration. And what's brilliant about his work, which is even better than the short Talmud, is that the short Talmud is only on the Babylonian Talmud. What about mitzvahs that the 5 books of Moses discuss that weren't discussed in the Babylonian Talmud? For example, laws about agricultural laws in the land of Israel, or temple laws. These things weren't discussed in the Babylonian Talmud because they weren't practical. He said, I'm going to write it all. You only have to read 5 books of Moses, read my work, and you're good. So the most famous one is the Mishnah Torah written by the Rambam. Rambam is an acronym from Moshe ben Maimon, famously called Maimonides. Let's take a taste of what. First, let's look at his explanation in text 5 on page 224 of why he says he went ahead and wrote it. And then we'll get a taste of his version of everything we learned on Passover, how he writes it, okay? So let's, text 5, can we get a Sharon?
Therefore, I, Moses, son of Naaman of Spain, girded my loins. I replied upon the rock, blessed be he. I examined all these texts and set out to compile the conclusion that can be extracted from all these texts as to what is forbidden and what is permitted, what is ritually impure and what is ritually impure, and the rest of the Torah's laws. I will present all the conclusions in clear language and a concise format, so the entire oral law will be easily accessible to everyone without questions or objections.
He says, I'm going to make the entire oral Torah easily accessible to everyone without questions or objections. Now that's one man. He didn't even have a team of editors. 14 books, extremely organized, exactly 1,000 chapters. And let's take a look of how it's fleshed out in text 6. So Gail, maybe you can read for us text 6 on page 225.
Sure. It is forbidden to eat on the eve of Passover from a little before the time for Mincha, so that we arrive at the eating of matzah, which is with an appetite. However, we may eat a small quantity of fruit or vegetables as long as we do not eat enough to feel full. By contrast, on the eves of Shabbat or the other festivals, we may continue eating until dark.
Right? You see that? That's like, oh, Rabbi, this is how we should have been learning it if lesson 2, lesson 3. That's so simple, straightforward, easy. So first of all, see that detail he brought in, that you're allowed to eat quantities of fruit or vegetables? Well, that's quoted 10 pages later in the Talmud. So he put it into the relevant place. This piece of information is useful here. When we say you cannot eat, what do you think? You have to fast? Oh, you could eat. Just the main concern is about appetite. So you could have fruit or vegetables. Okay? That's his conclusion. What about other festivals? No problem, right? So he go ahead, Genya.
So Rambam is Sephardic. I know
Mhm.
that in Chabad we follow the Sephardic nusach, like the davening. And I was wondering about the other Ashkenazi, because Chabad is Ashkenazi descendants, but I'm wondering how the other Orthodox feel about all the information about the Rambam. Because I mean, the Rambam has so many different, like a few views I remember from other JLIs, like with the dreams, like a lot of Jewish people do analyze dreams, and he says it doesn't really apply right now. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So the Rambam in his day, so he wrote, remember how he concluded? He said, I'm going to write it so that it'll be accessible to everyone without questions or objections. This will be the final book. No other books will have to be written. Well, what do you think happened? So first of all, the first thing that happened was there were rabbis that said, hold on, why do you get to decide what the final conclusions of the Talmud are? There's debate over here. It's not so straightforward. For example, remember the principle that the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, told us that we always follow Rabbi Yossi's opinion? But there's another competing statement in the Talmud that says we always follow majority opinion. So what happens when these two things come into conflict? Okay, obviously, if Rabbi Yossi's arguing with just one rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda, okay, we'll go with Rabbi Yossi. But what if Rabbi Yossi's arguing with 5 rabbis? Are we still going to go with Rabbi Yossi? So Maimonides might have concluded one way, and therefore say, okay, so based on that, this is the final ruling. But there's always different interpretations of how to apply the final ruling. And Maimonides, he actually later on in life, I said, I regret that I didn't include the sources of where I'm drawing my conclusions from. Because that was a lot of people. He said, I did that because I want to make it easy to read. I'm not going to include all the sources. I want to make it, you read the Torah, you read my book, and you're good to go.
But isn't
But
that one of the principles of Judaism to give honor to the sources?
That's a famous principle that the Talmud itself says. By
Right.
quoting the authors, you're bringing redemption to the world. And I think it's absolutely. These were some of the challenges that were brought on his text. Maimonides himself said, I wanted to do it, and I'm going to do it, but he never had time to actually complete his work. Many of the commentaries on Rambam tried to do that work of trying to draw how did he understand the original text to get to it. So remember I said that it gets compressed and then it gets decompressed and unopened. So there's lots of commentaries on Maimonides. One of the famous debaters or contractors of Maimonides was a man named Avraham ben David, Ravid II. And he decided he's going to write all his opinions that can't argue, but straight onto the copies of the Maimonides. And so they have this class, like they argue on almost every page. You can find 4 or 5 disagreements about the conclusions. And so they famously quip that, how do you know that the world exists? Because Maimonides says so, and Ravid doesn't argue. So it must be true, so this is kind of, and besides for that, Maimonides was also controversial because of his book, Guide for the Perplexed. And so that was a big clash just specifically with the French rabbis. But everyone came to see Maimonides as an amazing figure. The question, and especially after he passed away, was like hollowed. But remember I said the French rabbis, some of them didn't like the Maimonides. I don't know why we're going a little diversion, but I love history. Is that people decided to burn Maimonides' books. Guide for the Perplexed. They were burning it in the French square. Guess what happened 10 years later in that same French square? What we learned in lesson 1, all the copies of the Talmud were burnt. And so one of the great rabbis lamented and said, you see, we burn our books of rabbis we disagreed with. It ends up leading to, the Christians burning our Talmud.
Terrible.
So,
Did they
some of the sad history.
Wow.
But for overall, Maimonides has become like any halachic discussion. When people discuss it, they'll start with the Talmudic sources or Maimonides. They'll start from one of these launching points. Now, they might say we agree, and based on that, or they might say we disagree, but that has become the bar. Now, it was very practical. It was independent. That means you don't have to know the Talmud in order to understand it. It was organized by topic, extremely organized, and it was clear and concise. Beautiful. It still boggles the mind how this one person was able to do it in his time. Let's go. But what happens? Remember, we mentioned Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. He was a Sephardic rabbi. We mentioned Rambam, also Sephardic rabbi in Egypt. But there was a big French school of great Talmudists and rabbis, and they had their own path. And so they developed a whole separate tradition, and that became the Ashkenazi tradition. And it was there was a Tosafist, and mainly a rabbi who tried to codify it named the Rush, Rabbeinu Asher. He eventually became a rabbi of a large Sephardic community in Spain. He was such a great rabbi that they're like, we can handle an Ashkenazi rabbi, even though he's Ashkenaz, but he's such a great person. They agreed to hire him. And he didn't write like Maimonides. He more took the Rif's version, the Rif's short Talmud, and just tried to develop it a little further and make it more in line to Ashkenaz. And eventually, it became, in the 1400s, it became too complicated for Jews. They're like, hold on, I want to know how to live. Now I have to study Rambam, and I have to study the Rif and the Rush. How do I know what to do? And now it got all complicated again. So Rabbi Yosef Cairo, who lived in Tzfat in Israel, he says, that's it. I'll make it easy. I'm going to take all the conclusions of all these three great rabbis, and we'll do majority rules. Whenever whenever they agree, good. Whenever they disagree, 2 against 1, we'll follow that. He put it into a book. Again, first of all, he cut out anything that was not relevant to Jews living in exile without a temple and without, so he cut out all those. He put it into 4 books, and this became called, he said, it's like a set table, a Shulchan Aruch. A Shulchan Aruch means a set table. When he published it, there was another rabbi who lived in Ashkenaz, in the German lands, in the Rhinelands, named Reb Moshe Isserlis. And he was also doing the same exact concept, but his model was more in line with the Ashkenazic tradition. And then he's like, hold on, we can't put out these 2 competing books. The whole point is to bring everyone together. So he scrapped his version. He says, okay, I'm not publishing this version. Instead, I'll put notes on the Shulchan Aruch, on the set table. I'm going to put notes on extra details that the Ashkenazi yeshivas brought to bear and where the Ashkenazi yeshivas differ. And that became the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch. And that became the new standard that all Jewish communities accepted. Now, which version did you accept? Did you accept the Sephardic? Ashkenaz. You could look at the same book. The Sephardim followed Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and Ashkenaz followed the Ramaz addition to Rabbi Yosef Cairo. Okay? And that's basically, over the next few hundred years, there have been all this extra commentary and extra discussions. What do they mean? What about different cases that weren't discussed? All these commentaries come up, and then every 200-300 years, another rabbi comes along, and I'm going to bring consensus, trying to make it short, more digestible, and then the conversation continues, and that's still happening to this very day. Okay, so that's the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, the main, most famous rabbis, Rabbi Yosef Cairo and others. Go ahead, Rochelle. You're on mute. Let's see if I can.
So my question, yeah, no, I can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my question is, students still study the Gemara with all the different, interpretations and the different laws and arguments and everything. Yet we have the Shulchan Aruch just for the basically just telling us the laws. So, you know, why do we have studying all of the arguments and the different versions? What is the reason for that? Because that's, you know, I understand a big part of Jewish learning.
Yeah. So that's a good question, and it's a perfect time that you're asking it, because we just finished the whole part of the lesson where we spoke about the history of Jewish law post the Talmud, but now we're going to go into the history of studying the Talmud past the Talmud. And the main reason is we love Hashem. We love Hashem, and we're trying to understand him. He revealed his wisdom to us in the oral tradition. And by studying the Talmud, we get a taste for him. So it's our love affair with Hashem, because there's two halves to the Jewish tradition: is what you do, practice, but it's also the study. And so the practice that you'll find in the book of Jewish law, but the study of how God thinks and what God wants and how these traditions arrived and how they developed and the different opinions, even when we're learning an opinion that we disagree with, that we don't rule on, it still teaches us something. Oh, there was a child who thought that sending mom to the water park for her birthday was a good idea. That's interesting. You know, it was rejected, but that's an interesting way of thinking, and how it was analyzed and arrived. These are very valuable things. And so that's where we're going to go on to next.
As well. In the 1450s, the book world exploded with the invention of the printing press. By the 1470s, Jewish printers had learned the technology and were printing their own books. A handful of tractates, individual sections of the Talmud divided by subject, were printed in Spain in the 1480s, as well as in northern Italy by a printer named Joshua Sonsino. Sonsino laid out his Talmud like a glossed Bible, with the Talmud text in the middle and the commentary of Rashi on one side. On the other side, Sonsino, his nephew, and their editors featured a few of their favorite Tosafists. The Tosafists, who included Rashi's own son-in-law and grandsons, tried to explain what Rashi's comments meant. And as the publisher, he could pick the Tosafists he liked best. Printing a book like this took a lot of time and resources, and the Sonsinos only managed to print a few tractates. Enter Daniel Boomberg. Boomberg was a Christian from Antwerp who had moved to Venice. A friend convinced him there was money to be made in Jewish books, so he petitioned the Venetian Senate for the exclusive right to print the Talmud in Venice. Between 1519 and 1523, he printed the first complete set of the Talmud. He unabashedly copied Sonsino's geometric page layout and selection of commentaries, and also added page numbers, which were a new invention at the time. If we're being technical, they're actually folio numbers, meaning each leaf gets a single number for both the front and back of the sheet, which then have an A side and a B side. Within 100 years, this page numbering format would go out of style, and the Talmud is probably the only regularly published book today that still uses this old system. Boomberg's edition, and the two more he printed after the first sold out, were a huge success. His state-sanctioned monopoly, high-quality printing, large print runs, and location in the international business hub of Venice made sure of it. Other printers, some of them also Christian, wanted in on the game and put out their own editions in the 1540s and 50s. These new editions kept Boomberg's successful layout and added useful references to biblical verses and related discussions elsewhere in the Talmud, kind of like a massive Wikipedia citation system. They also added even more commentaries around the page as a sales tool. More commentaries equals better value. Persecution and censorship meant printing the Talmud was a fraught endeavor. But despite that, new editions were printed continually over the next 300 years. Almost every single one used Boomberg's layout. This progression culminated with the Vilna edition of the 1880s, whose exact composition is still used to this day. The Talmud has evolved into a page-by-page snapshot of nearly 2,000 years of collaborative discussion. Commentaries that are separated by centuries talk to each other across the page. Today, almost all editions and even digital Talmud apps still rely on the Vilna edition's composition and Boomberg's 16th century layout and pagination. Even the few that don't use his layout still use Boomberg's page numbers for reference, allowing readers to know where they are in the version that has become the standard.
That was really quick, quick history. But we're going to go a little slowly over some of the details. Any questions before we continue?
So what, I wasn't clear on when, like those Italian people that were Jewish, is it?
That was with the printing press, with the invention of the printing press in the 1400s.
Right, no, but I mean,
Yeah.
so was it just because it looked like They just took copied the columns, or they said something about the Talmud, so that was.
They didn't add any comment. They collected Jewish commentaries. They were selling it to Jews. Their audience was Jews. It was Hebrew text, but they were figuring out how do we sell it? Why are people going to abandon other copies and go for this copy? Well, the more commentaries you fit on the page, the extra value you're providing. Now, the marvel of doing this, you have to realize they had to put in every single letter, block by block, onto the page, lay it out. It was a very labor intensive and costly project. And then what happens if you discovered a mistake on the page? Right? Now you have to take out all the things and redo. It was really very complicated. And they had rabbis on the team. These Bamberg hired rabbis to help. You needed experts. Cut out of here is, always throughout history, there were censors. These were government officials who said, actually, that text you have to delete from your Talmud. So there's different versions have different deleted text. Now, today, when you buy a Talmud, all those versions have been brought back in. But there's a lot of deleted text that the censors did not allow for publishing. This is too radical, or puts this pagan prophet in a bad light, or other things. So those things got deleted. Okay, so let's go.
In the 14.
Okay, so we're going to explore this, and what's interesting is when it comes to the halachic codes, and this is my own observation, so if it doesn't hold water, you could debate this, it's fine. It's just my own observation. When it comes to the halachic codes, in trying to make the Talmud more halachically digestible, the champions are the Sephardim. The champions kind of they have the monopoly almost. Think Maimonides, the Rif, Rabbi Yosef Karo. They were always the initiators. They were pushing hard in this direction of making the law very accessible. But in the study of Talmud, who got the monopoly on that? Kind of the Ashkenazim. And the majority of commentaries that we have today are from the Ashkenazi communities. Now, it doesn't mean that there wasn't great commentaries from the Sephardim, and there wasn't great halachicists from the Ashkenazim, but it's just something we observe, something I'm observing. Maybe it's not true, but it appears to me to be true. Okay, so now we look at the Talmud page, and you're trying to study the Talmud, and what's the problems you have when you're trying to study the Talmud? Okay, number one, there's no punctuation, right? There's no punctuation, no vowels, and it's written in shorthand, right? There are certain, what I mean when it's written in shorthand is it says, what is the case? And it assumes you understand that question. It was written in a way, because always there's a balance. You're trying to transmit to text, do an exercise like this, right? You're trying to convey to your husband to buy bread, right? So you want to write it short, right? So you write loaf of bread. You don't write exactly necessarily which company, because you assume your husband knows what the company is already. But someone who doesn't have that context later on, it's missing. But there's a tug of war. You don't want to write more than you have to. You write just enough. So that's the whole language works like that. When someone posts a meme or someone says bread, you don't have to explain. I'm talking about flour that comes from wheat that is ground and then kneaded and then mixed with it and it's baked in an oven. Bread encompasses all of that. But what about a type of bird or type of thing that, it's like the people in Antarctica, in Alaska have a lot of words for snow, but we just have one word for snow. Because for us, snow, it's snow. But for them, it's like icy snow and this kind of snow and that kind of snow and all different types of snow because it's much more important. So for them, they have a lot of words. So that's the same thing. Like we don't have a word for tsunami because we didn't experience so many tsunamis. But in Japan or whatever, Korea, they have tsunamis. So they have a word for it. So that's the same thing. It works in the Talmud. The Talmud is cryptic to the people that it was written to. It was intelligible. People that live a little later, you have to flesh it out. And that was the first commentaries that appeared. They appeared about 500 years after the Talmud was written. And their main job was to unpack what is the basic meaning of the Talmud? And so what ended up happening is that when people would study the Talmud, they would have, originally it was two separate books. It was like a booklet that you had when you learned the Talmud. You had one line in the Talmud, one finger pointing in the Talmud, and your other finger was pointing in the commentary, that as you read the Talmud, you would look inside the commentary at the same time with your other finger, and you keep track to understand what it means. The most famous of the commentaries is Rashi. Now, Rashi is an acronym for Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki. Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki lived in France, and he was probably the most famous commentary. He has a famous commentary on the 5 books of Moses, and he has a famous commentary on the Talmud. And he says, I'm going to make it less cryptic. I'm going to make it easier. So his work is considered like the starting point. If you're trying to understand Talmud, you start with him. You go, what does he say? And that gives you a clue. Okay, so to get a taste for how valuable this is, let's go to text 7. Okay, text 7 is a text that we discussed outside last week at the end, but here it's without the punctuation. So, Kenya, can you read for us text 7, page 229?
The Raw Talmud. What is the case of that the employer said to them at 4, and he went and said to them at 3, what is the function of complaint? He knew and accepted if the employer said to him at 3, and he went and said to them at 4, what is the case if he told them your wages are on me? He gives them from his own. That's so cryptic.
Completely unintelligible, but that's literally from the Talmud. That's exactly what it looks like, Talmud. There's no commas and nothing spelled out, right? So let's look at the magic of Rashi, right? So over here we have an example where we see Rashi. What is the case that gives them a right to complain, but nothing more? What is the case in the Mishnah that says that a boss and a worker, and there was deception involved, and the workers have a right to complain, but they cannot sue for money? Rashi filled us in. So what is the case? Should have a question mark at the end. What is the case? Question mark. And then with Rashi, it fills in the blank. So now I'm going to reread this text. Now, if it goes over your mind, that's fine. I'm just, for those that are interested, of how I would read this text as if I'm Rashi, okay? As if I'm Rashi, teaching you the Talmud, this is how I would read it. What is the case that is considered deception, but not deception enough for fraud that you can sue, but enough that you should have a right to complain? If the employer hired an agent and the employer was willing to pay workers 4 zuzim, and the agent went and said to the other workers that the boss is willing to pay 3, and then they worked for 3, what is the function of complaint? This is not the case of our Mishnah, because there is no complaint to be had here. They agreed to 3, and they worked for 3, and they got 3. So there's no complaint here. So rather, let's tweak the case. Oh, he knew and he accepted. The workers knew and accepted. So what's the complaint? If the employer said to him at 3, if the boss promised to give 3 coins, and the agent went and told them 4 coins, what is this case? How did the agent promise it to them? Did the agent promise it to them that he's going to be a responsibility, or that the boss is going to be a responsibility? If he told them your wages are on me, that means I accept responsibility. He gives them from his own. Then he's responsible to pay the difference. That the boss only agreed to pay 3. He told them 4. He has to pay the extra coins, so he could get sued. It's not just complain. They have a right to collect. ... Then this conversation continues. But I'm just giving you a taste that we just learned a cryptic code, but without Rashi, it makes no sense. But with Rashi, this whole thing starts to make a little more sense. And of course, nowadays, there's commentaries on Rashi to make Rashi more understandable. So that's just how it keeps on going throughout history. Okay, here's another, so that was the main, so there were commentaries that their main goal was to explain the text. Nothing more. Rashi doesn't have opinions. He's not going to say, I don't understand the Talmud, I disagree with the Talmud, what's going on. He's explaining to you straightforward. He's not sharing his own opinion, so to speak. Of course, it's his interpretation, so there's a lot of creativity there, but he's not trying to tell you how to think. He's just helping you understand the Talmud. But his grandsons, they were famous, called the Tosafists. And it wasn't just his grandsons, there was other people, French Talmudists as well, called the Tosafists. What does Tosfos mean? Additions. Tosfos means additions. And they tried to continue the work of the Talmud. So first of all, they tried to, let's look at our case, right? Our case we discussed, you're not allowed to eat a meal after a certain time, right? On the eve of Passover. So this is a Talmudic question. Hold on. We know there's a ban on eating matzah the day of Pesach. And we know there's a ban on eating chametz the day of Pesach. So what exactly is included in this new ban that you can't eat? We already got the whole day you can't eat chametz, the whole day you can't eat matzah. So what, now there's a new ban that you can't eat after mincha time? You already can't eat. There's no chametz, there's no matzah. So what exactly are we talking about? So the Tosafos say, first of all, there's a unique kind of bread that's not chametz, but you cannot use it for matzah for the Seder. And that is a matzah made with juice. It's a rich matzah. It's a rich matzah. The Torah says for the Seder, you have to use lechem oni, bread of affliction, poor man's bread. Fruit juice matzah, egg matzah, you cannot use that for the Seder. Okay, egg matzah, you can't, it's not chametz, but you cannot use it for the Seder. So that's when the Mishnah said, when the conclusion of the Talmud is, the rabbis made a ban, they're referring to, don't fill up on egg matzah, because you're not going to have appetite for the poor man's matzah, okay? So that's one answer. Tosfos gives another answer. He says, there are even rabbis that say you're not allowed to have egg matzah at all on Passover. They consider it too risky because egg matzah that has a little bit of water in it could become chametz very quickly, even faster than the 18 minutes that it takes for regular water matzah. It takes 18 minutes to become chametz. Fruit juice matzah takes even longer than 18 minutes, but fruit juice with water takes even quicker than water matzah, and therefore there are communities that hold you can't even have egg matzah and water matzah, fruit juice matzah throughout Pesach. So what is this talking about? It's talking about fruits and vegetables. The ban was, don't fill up on too much fruits and vegetables. Yeah, you can have fruits and vegetables, but not a gross amount. So you should have an appetite. So these are just how the conversations continue. Yeah, the Talmud says there's a ban, but how do you apply this? What ban are we talking about? So this is how the conversation continues, the work of the Tosafos to continue these conversations. And they also try to resolve contradictions. Like sometimes you feel like, hold on, in this part of the Talmud we ruled this way, in this part of the Talmud we ruled that way. It seems inconsistent. And then he would try to make it smooth, like a round ball. No, everything plugs into everything else. Everything is completely consistent. So those were the works of the Tosafos. Let me read it in text 9. They made the Talmud like a ball, spinning it and rolling it from place to place until it was all smooth and interconnected. In other words, sometimes when you're learning the Talmud, you get narrowed into a certain subject, and the Tosafos try to interlink every discussion with every other part of the Talmud that should be all interconnected and all seamless and all smooth. So these are some of the works of the Tosafos. And these are the main, and it never stopped. there's still books and books of commentaries and commentaries. And today, when you buy a Talmud, you're not just buying the Mishnah and Gemara. You're buying the Mishnah, the Gemara, Rashi, some of the Tosafos, not all, just a selection of the Tosafos. And by the way, not everyone agreed that the Tosafos should be put on the page. Some people said you should put the halachas, the final conclusion should be on the page. Especially they're like, why do we need extra information? Give us more halacha. So there's always, but just the way it went, they had the market, so they put a selection of Tosafos. People like, why do they choose these commentaries? Why not different? And you always had those controversy within the top. And then people put on glosses. Okay, the Talmud quotes a verse, or Tosafos quotes a verse. They assume you know where that verse is, because everyone knows all 5 books of Moses, right? Everyone knows every word, of course. Well, the printers in the 1500s are like, we don't know about that. We're going to clue you in where to find these verses so you can look up the context further. And then they added other commentaries and more layers, and then they put in the back, and it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And today, there's a website online called Sefaria.org, Sefaria.com. That's a website that has a lot of Jewish texts, and you can click on a text and see all the commentaries that are discussing that text. So it's really, the conversations continued. So what are the popular study regimens that exist today when people study Talmud? So first of all, there are people that they just ad hoc, whatever they're in the mood, they study, but there's certain systems. So one of them is called Chalukas Hashas. Chalukas Hashas is an old tradition where there's a principle in Torah that if you have a mitzvah, somebody else can't do it for you. It's your mitzvah. You got to do it yourself. But what if it's a mitzvah that you can't do by yourself? Let's say you're trying to bring a big heavy stone to the Holy Temple. You can't do it by yourself. What? I'm trying to do it, but I can't. So you call your friend. When the two of you do it together, it's not as if each of you have half of the mitzvah. It's because neither of you could have done it on your own. It's as if each of you have 100% of the mitzvah. Right? So that's a principle that exists. Same thing with learning the Talmud. Who here thinks they could learn the whole Talmud? Or the whole Talmud in 1 year? It's a lot. So traditionally, what many Jewish communities have done is 1 day a year, they'll put up a sign, a big chart in the shul with all the tractates of the Talmud. And everyone in the community will pick one that they're going to study that year. And then a year later, they all come to a big celebration where together as a community, they studied the whole Talmud. Because each one independently couldn't study the whole Talmud, but each one focused on one tractate. And together, they learned the whole Talmud. This is the date when Chabad communities do this, is on Yud Tes Kislev. On the 19th of Kislev, that's when they everyone chooses their tractates. Okay, so that's one system of studying the Talmud.
Quick question to the comment before.
Yeah.
So if someone collects the whole year money and then wants to, in memory or honor, and then wants to include someone else on where it goes, the mitzvah is together or only the person who collected the money?
It's together.
It is. Okay, good.
Together. We're talking about more personal obligations.
Okay.
So there's a mitzvah, there's a mitzvah for one of the mitzvahs of studying Torah is to know the whole Torah. There is such a mitzvah in the Torah. Learn the whole Torah, so that's Maimonides was saying, with my book, you can learn the whole Torah because you're learning every single mitzvah. With the other codes, you can't learn because you're not learning all the biblical laws and all the other stuff. Okay. Now, the next book, another system that was very popular in the 1500s was Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov was meant at a time that many Jews had to work so hard to earn a living. Their kids were brought up to the farms very early. People were exhausted. They didn't have time really to learn. And so they would come to shul to daven mincha prayers. And afterwards, the rabbi would teach them the legends of the Talmud, the Aggadic teachings of the Talmud. And that was done, this was a very widespread practice for 400 years, that between Mincha and Ma'ariv, in every synagogue, there was a study of this part of the Agadata. Remember we mentioned there's halacha of the Talmud and the Agada of the Torah. They would study the Agada together. Another system, this is a system developed in the late 1800s called Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi is you study a page a day, a double-sided page every day, and you finish the Talmud in 7 years. And there's a system. Everyone's on the same page. It's not like everyone starts from page 1. If you decide today I want to join, well, today they're in, I don't remember which track they're in. Maybe someone in the Zoom crowd knows where they are. And you just join that. And there's tons of videos and tons of things. And every 7 years, they rent out MetLife Stadium or other places, and everyone gets together and they do one grand celebration on the study of a page of Talmud every day. In the 1980s, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said, I want everyone to study the Mishnah Torah. That was Maimonides' book. I want everyone to study the whole Mishnah Torah. You could do that by learning 3 chapters a day, or by learning 1 chapter a day. And how long does it take to learn a chapter? Well, it depends. It takes between 15 to 35 minutes a chapter. So it's a doable commitment. But if you're doing 3 chapters a day, then you have to times that it's either 45 minutes a day, or if you're the first time you're doing it, it's an hour and a half or 2 hours a day. But in a year, you study the Talmud. You study the entire oral tradition. Okay, so this is a version of, let's go to the back of our books. We have in the appendix, not the appendix, the additional features. I don't have page numbers for it. Yeah, page 242. Let's go to page 242. Welcome to our museum. On page 242, you see major milestones in the publication of the Talmud, right? So in 200 CE, we have the compilation of the Mishnah. 350 CE, we have the redaction of the Jerusalem Talmud. 5th century CE, we have the Babylonian Talmud redacted. 6th century CE, this is fascinating. In northern Israel, there's a floor that has a mosaic dated to the 6th century with the Mishnah, a mosaic of a text from the Mishnah into the floor of the synagogue in northern Israel. Okay, let's go 750 CE. The oldest extant Talmudic manuscript that's still available to us is from 750 CE. So that means about 250 years after the Talmud was finished, we have a text of the Talmud, at least a part, from 750. In 10th, 11th century, that was a first text of the Mishnah that had vowelized, had the nikudot, had the vowels. 1342, the Munich manuscript is the oldest surviving copy of the entire Babylonian Talmud, and it's all online today. You could, I think, at the Oxford Digital Library, you can see the original manuscript of the Talmud from 1342 of the entire Talmud. Really, you have to realize each letter was handwritten by a scribe of the entire Talmud. This is like a treasure. 1470 is the first printing of the Talmud, right? Printed in the Arabian Peninsula in 1480s, just 30 years after the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg. Okay. And now we go to 1484 is the creation of the Daf format by the Cincino family. 1520, we get the Bamberg Talmud, which that really was the first complete printed Talmud with the layout that we have today. And that made it very affordable. When we say affordable, we mean it was only a year's salary instead of a lifetime salary, so affordable is relative. Okay. In 1523, we have the first printing of the Jerusalem Talmud, which you have to remember. When people are studying the Jerusalem Talmud, what are they studying it for? Not to know how to live, right? It's not going to teach you. We don't anyways rely on it for final rulings, but because of our love, so it really, people that study it, it's a very unique study. There's not as much commentary on the Jerusalem Talmud as there is on the Babylonian Talmud. 16th to 19th centuries, we have translations of the Talmud. Latin translations of portions of the Talmud were produced as early as 1519. Pictured here is a translation of Tractate of Avodah Zarah, produced by George Eliezer Edzard and published in Hamburg in 1705. There's also French, German, Russian, and English. What do you guys think of translation? Do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea? Well, translations make things very accessible, but also very easy for people to misunderstand the original context. And that actually, the anti-Semites loved it, right? And today, I was reading a year ago, saw it online, there was this active discussion, Sefaria, or this website, Torah Text, they have the whole Talmud online in English. Maybe it should be behind the passcode, because the Talmud is for the Jewish people. Why do we need people digging around and finding ways to harass us? And then the other argument is like, no, first of all, it's out there. Once it's out of the bag, you can. And number two, more important is making the Torah accessible. So there's a trade-off. Torah is more accessible. Yes. Originally, the Talmud was completely oral. That goal was to keep it in the Jewish hands. But eventually they had to write it down, and eventually we have to translate it. And that's kind of how the conversation continues. Let's go on to the next page. Let's continue, because there's more here. Okay, 1820 was a very popular edition called the Slavita Shas, because it was very advanced, there was a lot of errors in the earlier versions, and the Slavita Shas was, first of all, beautiful type and free of a lot of errors. And the people that printed this, they were Hasidic Jews, and they would go to mikveh, and not before setting the plate, and they would actually immerse the printing plate into the mikveh. They felt there was a special holiness in it. So that's a unique shas called the Slavita Shas. But the most famous shas is what we have in the 1880s, the Vilna Shas. The Vilna Shas, the one who printed it, who was the leader, was actually a woman, a Jewish woman from Vilna, that she was the one that produced the Vilna Shas. And really a fascinating project, how a widow, Ram, the family Ram, how they printed it. And then we get to 1941, we see how Jews kept on printing even during the Holocaust in the DP camps. In the DP camps, there's printed shasas. They were printing in the DP camps. Okay, but let's go on today. In 1965, we have the first Talmud with vowels, a printed version with vowels. We already had a manuscript with vowels, but now you have a printed version with vowels, with commas, with question marks, and with a Hebrew commentary. That's the Steinsaltz Talmud, also one man, Rabbi Adin Evan Yisrael Steinsaltz of Glorious. He tried to keep to the pagination, but it was quite difficult. And today, the two popular English translations in 1990s and 2012 is on the bottom. I'll start with because it's older. The Art Scroll Shas, which that's very popular. It's about for $2,000 you could buy the whole set, or about $40 a volume. And there it's like interpolated. That means you have the Hebrew text and the English text in one paragraph. So it's really there. It's really good for people who understand how to read Hebrew, but don't necessarily understand, but they understand English better. Versus the newer version, the Koran Talmud, which you have above, that's much easier for people that just want to read the English, because you have the Hebrew and the English side by side. It's not mixed into each other. It's an easier flow, but it doesn't go as deep into the commentaries, but it focuses more on illustrations and halacha. And that Koran Talmud is you can buy the set, beautiful set for about $2,000, but it's also the version that you have online for free that I'm showing here on TorahText.org that we have up on the screen. This is kind of our Talmud that we're discussing. You could see how the bold type is try to be a literal translation versus the unbolded type. That's more the commentary. And over here, This is the same thing with Mishnah Torah, Maimonides. You want to learn Maimonides in English? So it's also available online for free, torahtext.org. And if you look up on the top, you see over here, okay, this is an image, but if you went to the website and you clicked on this, you could add in the commentaries. I want to see this commentary, I want to see that commentary. I took it out, but you could see all the commentaries. And if you click on this button here, you could see audio classes and video classes on this thing. So you're like, I don't like to read so much, or I like to read together with a class. So you could hear the audio, someone reading it out. And sometimes the translations are not the same. When people's doing an audio, it's not always the same. They're usually an English version, but they're reading from the Hebrew text as they're teaching the English. So it's not like an audio book of the English, but it's classes on you have that on the Talmud, and you have that on the Rambam as well. So what else do we have here? Okay, this is a podcast that if you like to listen to the legends of the Talmud, he took the legends from 2 tractates, and each episode is like 15 minutes. He's giving a class, and it's really easy and fun to listen on your drive. There's like 200 episodes. Each one's about 10-15 minutes long, and Legends of the Talmud. You can find it wherever podcasts are found. And okay, now what about us? Should we invest time into studying Talmud ourselves? What do you think? Good idea? First of all, the argument is to say, what do we know? We're just going to do we have a right to add our own commentary? Or should we just be learning it and not adding our own commentary? And the answer is that it's very important for the commentary to be authentic, but there's value in every voice needs to be heard, because the truth is there are parts of the oral tradition that are locked away, that even Moshe is waiting for that to be unlocked. And who's going to unlock it? Every single soul of the Jewish people has the key to a different part of the Talmud. And so Moshe's waiting for every single Jew to study the Torah and uncover the deeper meaning of a text, because there's a part, your soul, although it's connected to the whole Torah, your soul is deeply connected to a specific part of the 5 books of Moses and a specific part of the oral tradition that only you can unlock the code to that. So it's an obligation that you have to add your voice to the Torah, because there are parts that even Moshe can't come up with. He's waiting for you to unlock it. He taught it, but he didn't understand the deep meaning of what he was teaching. Moses taught it. So nothing that's going to be innovated is original. Everything that, that's always the tension, is someone who's too innovative. We say, you're practicing a different religion. It's not Judaism anymore. So, but if it's not innovative, there's like, okay, what are you telling us? No, there's innovation within the tradition of what's the deeper meaning here? How do we apply this to this new case? How do we understand it on a deeper level? And there's layers and layers of meaning, and everyone has to add it says there's 70 main ways, 70 main layers of studying the Torah. That you're studying the Torah, you can have 70 people in the room, they're each seeing it a different and perfectly valid way. When it comes to halacha, we have to follow one way, our rabbis in our community. But when it comes to interpretations, it's endless.
Tradition and innovation are oxymorons. Tradition means preserving the past. Innovation demands change. But the Jewish nation excels at both, constantly generating fresh interpretations of traditional texts, because the Torah's ancient guidelines allow for endless originality of thought. In recent times, the Lubavitcher Rebbe treated the Torah's tradition of creativity to an unprecedented innovation of its own.
אף על פי was פלפולי דרייסה ist הדבר הכי גודל, aber בנגיע zu drucken das und nefit sein, ist leih כל הרצה ליטל לסק, jitel, es darf sein mehr nicht wie die, was haben auf drauf, Eure Bruder, sie sollen sich damit echt vernehmen, beschasse geworden die Riedes Haderis und Limud Hatere, Alpiklole Hatere, und Bedarke Hatere, und in Nemese Ifane, da wir haben Asilus Miyuchad, und Aidet Miyuchad, Vechulhu, der Fall ist Kedai, ab mir Ede sein und Misare sein. Und die alle, was kann sein, als seine Scheiche zu Chidush und Teire.
The Rebbe handed the keys of innovation to whomever studies Torah. He campaigned for students of every age and stage of knowledge to seek and discover novel insights within all the classic works of the Jewish tradition, and to publicize those discoveries.
Ich habe gebeten, einfach bekamen mit Chemis, dass die Schiris, was geben mir Reis. Kefze, Aloche, Kefze, Chidush, paar der Rosh Schiris. Viele von der älteren Bochern, so das sich geteilt für die Bochern, weil der Walle seine Sachen nicht älter. Ich als Bocher viel, dass man erwartet, man soll etwas mechanisch sein, ist bekommt ein Geschick.
Back in 1986, Rabbi Ruvi New was a student who hesitatingly heeded the Rebbe's call. He submitted what he thought was an original challenge to a text of Rashi's commentary on the Torah to his yeshiva's journal. His entry was then read by the Rebbe himself.
A question popped into my head, which I quickly suppressed. I thought that that was something, for the big leaguers. One of the members of the editorial board said, put all of those calculations to the side. This is what the Rebbe wants, so just write it. My question is the first one published because it's the first Rashi of Bamidbar. And then I see on the bottom a note from the editor, Rabbi Galitsky. The question has been dealt with extensively by some of the classic commentaries on Rashi. The person who submitted the question did not take the time to do any research and look into Rashi's commentaries. So you talk about being thrown under the bus. Anyway, the next day it came to that point of the Farbrengen where the Rebbe is now going to talk about the Rashi. He said, the question was submitted about the first Rashi. I remember like shaking like a leaf. Then he says, even though the commentaries address this issue, in light of the fact that the person who submitted the question also asked a similar question from the beginning of Parshas Bahar, means that we therefore need to find a singular answer that can resolve the question both from the beginning of Bamidbar and also Bahar. The Rebbe then proceeded to give a beautiful explanation as to both Rashis. After the Farbrengen, the first person that I looked for was Rabbi Galitsky. He said no, with a big smile on his face. He said, no, the Rebbe is angenommen von dir, the Rebbe defended you.
Every Jew is encouraged to drink from the divine well springs of Torah wisdom. And every Jew is empowered to become a fountain of fresh Torah ideas.
So the ask here is, don't just study Talmud and study the text of the treasures of the Jewish people. Become an innovator. Add to the treasure. Bring your own voice to it, because it's so important. It's so important not to just have Torah scholarship, but to have Torah scholarship by everyone, because everyone has a unique perspective, a unique angle. God is infinite, so it's impossible that one rabbi could see the infinite. It just doesn't work that way. You need everyone together, standing in a circle. Everyone sees from a different angle. Together, we get a picture of the infinite wisdom of Hashem. But that only works if everyone's doing it together. Okay, so the Talmud remains accessible to every Jew thanks to generations of perseverance. There was hard times for the Talmud. It wasn't easy to go around with the Talmud. People sacrificed a lot to learn the Talmud, to understand it, to preserve it, and we have it thanks to them. And we're going to do the work to make sure the next generation also has the Talmud too. That it's really, as long as the chain of history existed, the chain of the Jewish people existed, the chain of the Talmud exists. Yeah. Okay, so this is for Rochelle, some reasons for studying the Talmud. Okay, this was you asked earlier. Okay, so first of all, the Talmud is a repository of halacha, the instructions through which we can live up to the covenant we made with Hashem at Mount Sinai. You could also find this in your book as well, but we have it on the screen. Number two, if you need reasons, if you still need reasons, we'll review some of the reasons we presented in this course. Number two, the struggle to clarify the divine will and wisdom as expressed in Jewish law is itself an experience of bonding with God. In the study of Talmud, our minds are immersed in the divine. Number three, the written Torah and God's message is God's message to us. The oral Torah, which is intended to be engraved in our memories, allows us to assume an active role in our relationship with God. Number four, the Talmud teaches us to find value even in views that are not accepted as the final halacha. Number five, all of the Talmud's teachings, and especially in Aggadic sections, contain deeper spiritual, philosophical, and ethical messages beyond the fact that if the fence falls, who has to pay for it? There's always deeper levels of what this means, deeper levels. For example, our whole discussion about chametz, getting rid of chametz. So it's like, oh, well, we can't eat chametz because it's leavened bread, and we just got to get rid of it because that's what was done because they had matzah. But how does a spiritual study of it really go? Ego, the fears of ego hold us back. Chametz represents, it's inflated, it's full of hot air. It's inflated. It represents the ego. And our fears of ego stop us from living our full lives because we have all these, we live with so much fear of like fight or flight fear of like, if I do this, I won't survive. The truth is we probably will survive, but we feel like we won't. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. If you have a clothing store and you're going to close it on Shabbat, I can't do that. All my customers come on the weekend. Everyone comes. Weekend is when you have the clothing. You can't close your clothing store on Shabbat, right? Your ego is trying to survive, right? Is really trying to survive. But when the Jews marched into the desert, what did they experience? Is there food in the desert? No, but God took care of that. Like, okay, so God will take care of me also. I don't have to hold on to these things as tightly as I feel. So for 8 days a year, we burn the chametz. That means we burn our ego. We're saying, we don't need to secure our own life. Hashem is going to take care of us. Hashem is going to rescue us. Okay. But then Hashem wants us to have our personality too. He doesn't want us to become like, oh God, whatever you say. He wants us to have personality, but he wants it to be healthy ego, not inflated ear ego. So the rest of the year we do eat chametz because ego's okay. It just has to be healthy. So we put in check. So that's just a spiritual meaning. So that's a very important level of learning Torah. Okay, let's go on to the last lesson. The Talmudic approach trains us in critical thinking to question every premise and reach the core of every issue, which is what has made the Jewish mind so brilliant. So those are some reasons why you might be worthwhile to study the Talmud. Okay, and remember, you say, but I can't start now. It's already too late. I'm already enter your age, right? It's already too late. But do we remember what we taught about Rabbi Akiva? That Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and he held up the whole oral tradition is accredited to him. It almost died out, but he kept it afloat. Well, he didn't know how to read Aleph Beis until he was 40 years old. He didn't know how to read the Hebrew letters. He was completely ignorant. But when he saw the rock was dripping through the stone and making a hole through the stone, what did he remember? If water could go through the stone, then the Torah could enter my brain too. and he eventually became one of the Jewish leaders. Now, you don't have to become, you're not required to have 24,000 students. I don't want that to impose you, oh, it doesn't work with my schedule because I have yoga on this day. How am I going to have 24,000 students? Don't worry. Just get into the Talmud. You have to swim in it, and eventually you'll taste it.
Lesson 6. The Talmud until today. 1. The Talmud's rulings became binding for the entire Jewish nation because they are the consensus of the sages and were accepted by the Jewish people worldwide. After its completion, Jewish communities were dispersed in exile. New halachic decisions by local rabbis were binding within their own communities, not universally. 2. Deriving halacha from the Talmud has always been challenging, and expert scholars were consulted for guidance through responsa. Halachic digests like the Halachot of the Rif simplified the Talmud's discussions, making practical rulings more accessible by omitting lengthy debates. 3. Rambam's Mishnah Torah organized Jewish law systematically, offering clear presentations of halachic rulings derived from the Talmud. The Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Yosef Karo, with Rabbi Moshe Isserlis's glosses, became the most accepted code, incorporating numerous halachic opinions and addressing new questions and customs. 4. Rashi's explanatory commentaries help students understand the Talmud's complex, unpunctuated text. The Tosafot created by Rashi's students uncover new depths of Talmudic insight by resolving questions and contradictions in the Talmud's text. 5. All true Torah innovations were already given to Moses at Mount Sinai. Every generation of scholars builds on previous works, uncovering new insights and layers of meaning. Every Jew has the potential to contribute novel insights to the Talmud. 6. Today, there are various methods for studying Talmud, making the study of Talmud accessible to everyone. These approaches allow for both in-depth study and fast-paced learning, accommodating learners at all levels. 7. Rabbi Akiva's story inspires all Jews to pursue Talmud study regardless of prior knowledge. Each of us is able to begin the journey to scholarship.
Okay. And with that, I will miss you all until
So the next one.
until the next one. Until the next one.
I have a request.
Yeah. Go
Would you
ahead.
consider taking us to the OHEL and doing like a study session with us there?
For sure. Absolutely. Who's in?
Oh.
And when?
Well, that's
Yeah.
up to you. I mean, Sundays work. I know it's busy at the OHEL on Sunday, but
Sunday is very
Um,
packed.
yeah,
but-
Thursday works for me. I don't know if it works for anyone else.
Okay, let's do Sundays first. Who's available Sunday? Okay.
Sunday's good.
Sunday's good. Okay, we have a few for Sunday. And who's available for Thursday?
I could usually do Thursday.
We also have Thursdays. Oh, Thursdays. Okay, so let's do Thursday. We'll do Thursday. How about tomorrow? Who's ready to go tomorrow?
Tomorrow I can't, tomorrow I
Okay.
have, yeah, I'm doing a whole.
Okay, and the next Thursday is the Shloshim, so it's a little complicated. And the Thursday after that is Pesach almost,
Yes.
you know. So
Why don't we do it?
we're gonna do it right after Pesach, the Thursday after Pesach, which is about a week after Pesach. At what do people like to do in the morning?
So that's the 20, is that the 22nd? No, that's
24th.
the 20, that's the 20, I have a conference, but this is more important. Okay. That's great.
Okay,
So where,
The
where, this is.
this is at the OHO. We're going in Queens.
Oh,
Queens.
It's good.
Yeah. So I'm gonna send everyone, okay, this is beautiful. And we're learning Talmud together, correct? Is that what we're doing?
I mean, whatever the group wants, whatever you
Absolutely.
think.
Absolutely. Okay, beautiful. Thank you for introducing that. Good.
That was a great idea.
Okay, so Thursday, the 24th at 10 a.m.
10 a.m. to meet over there.
to 10 a.m. to meet over there. What do you think? Is that too
You want 10? Could it be,
it could be, no, I'm flexible.
10:30?
I'm
could it be 11?
11. 11 is better. Okay.
Is there parking there?
There is
Okay, so
parking.
what's
Yeah.
the day?
There's not great parking, but there's street
Okay,
parking.
so it's Thursday.
Thursday, April 24th at 11 a.m. A meetup at the Ohel to study together, Talmud, and to pray at the Ohel.
But do you know the address offhand? Because
The,
you'll send it to us?
it's-
You'll send it
it's-
to us?
I'll send it. It's on Francis Lewis Boulevard, the
Good.
Ohel. You'll Google the Ohel. They'll take you.
Oh, hell.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. But I'll send it in the email as well.
Okay.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
You'll
What?
include the address.
I'll include the address.
So
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
beautiful.
Rabbi. Great course.
Amazing,
Rabbi.
amazing. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Nice.
When are we meeting for the
Jillian, you have to
next-
introduce me to your mother sometime.
Yes, maybe I can convince her to go on the 24th. She's camera shy.
Okay. She's next to you? Or
No,
she's-
no, she's home, but she's camera shy. But she'll take the next course too. She
Okay.
loves it.
And the next class is May 7th.
May 7th for the
Good.
next
And what's that
class.
going to be? I missed the beginning. That's all. I
That's
was-
this. You can pull it out.
Oh,
That's-
Okay. Beautiful. Very good. Okay.
that's great.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Bye. Have a happy Passover,
Thank you,
everyone.
Sophie.
Happy Passover.
So when do we sign up for this?
Do it.
I'll be there.
Okay.
I'll be there.
So,
Same time, like 7, every Wednesday at 7?
Wednesdays at 7.